In the far edge of the Andromeda galaxy, there was a grand empire known as Valeria. Its ruler, Queen Seraphis, was known across many worlds as a wise and noble leader. Her voice carried authority. Her presence inspired loyalty. But behind all her strength was a secret sorrow that no one could heal. Her only daughter, Princess Lyria, had gone missing months ago during a diplomatic mission beyond the safe borders of the Empire. Her ship vanished without a trace, and every rescue effort failed. The Queen stood every evening by the balcony of her crystal palace, looking at the stars. She hoped to see a signal, a sign, anything that might tell her that her daughter was still alive. Her advisors told her to move on, to focus on her duties, but a mother's heart does not forget. Her royal halls, once full of laughter, now felt empty. The Empire's people whispered stories about how even the great Seraphis had fallen silent. Some said her eyes no longer glowed with royal power. Others said her heart had turned cold from grief. Across the stars, far away from Valeria, a human explorer named Captain Elias Ward was finishing his routine survey near Mars Colony 3. He had worked alone for many years, mapping asteroid belts and helping stranded ships. To him, space was quiet and honest. It did not lie and it did not judge. That day, his scanner caught something unusual, a crash signal from the red desert surface below. It looked old, almost broken. Still, his heart told him to check. Elias guided his small ship down through the thin Martian air. Dust storms rose around him, painting the sky a deep orange. When he landed, he saw twisted metal half buried in the sand. It looked unlike any human design, smooth, silver, and engraved with strange symbols that shimmered faintly under sunlight. Carefully he approached and looked inside. There, half covered in dust and sparks, was a small figure, fragile, pale, with hair that seemed to glow softly like moonlight. Her eyes opened weakly, revealing a color he had never seen before, bright silver like liquid light. She tried to speak, but her words were broken and strange. Elias didn't understand her language, but he could see fear in her expression. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold. Without thinking, he reached out gently. "It's all right," he whispered softly, his voice calm and steady. "You're safe now." She didn't know his words, but she understood the tone. Slowly, her eyes fluttered shut as she fainted. Elias lifted her carefully and carried her back to his ship, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. He had rescued people before, miners, soldiers, travelers, but never a being like this. She was not human, yet she seemed so fragile, so alive. Once aboard, he activated the medical pod and began scanning her. The ship's AI struggled to identify her species. "Unknown life form detected," it said. "Structure humanoid, energy patterns unstable." Elias frowned. Whoever she was, she had gone through something terrible. Hours passed. He repaired her breathing mask and stabilized her pulse. When she woke, she stared at him with confusion. Her voice trembled as she said something he couldn't understand. Elias tried to respond with slow gestures, pointing to himself and saying, "Elias." Then he pointed to her, asking silently for her name. She hesitated before touching her chest and saying softly, "Lyria." The name stayed in his mind. Lyria. It sounded beautiful and lonely, like a song carried across the stars. Elias didn't know her story, but he could sense her pain. He gave her water, helped her sit, and showed her the stars outside the window. At first she watched him with caution, but when he smiled gently and offered food, her fear began to fade. Even without words, a bridge formed between them, built not by power or duty, but by kindness. While she rested, Elias repaired the damaged pod. He noticed an emblem carved into its hull, a spiral sun surrounded by wings. It didn't match any known alien alliance. He recorded it, wondering what empire she might belong to. Somewhere in the universe, someone must be looking for her. As Lyria slept, Elias looked out at the horizon. The red sand stretched endlessly, glowing under distant sunlight. He didn't know why fate had brought her to him, but deep down he felt it wasn't by chance. Maybe she had fallen from a place where humans were considered nothing. Maybe to her people he was just another primitive being. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that a life needed help, and he was there. In the cold silence of Mars, one human had chosen compassion over fear, and somewhere across light years in her shining palace, a queen looked at the stars, not knowing that her lost daughter had been found, safe in the care of a man she had never met. The universe was vast and cruel, but sometimes in the most unexpected corners. Humanity proved it still carried something rare, a heart that refused to let another life fade alone. When Lyria woke again, the soft hum of the ship surrounded her. She lay inside a glowing chamber wrapped in warmth. Her body still ached, but her mind felt clearer than before. Beside her, Elias sat quietly, fixing a broken panel on the control board. When he saw her eyes open, his face softened with relief. He smiled kindly. "You're awake. That's good." Lyria didn't understand the words, but she could sense his calm tone. It reminded her of home. The quiet halls of her mother's palace, the sound of gentle voices that once soothed her as a child. But this being before her was strange. His skin was rough, his eyes smaller, his shape unfamiliar, yet there was something honest in his expression. Elias brought her water and motioned for her to drink. At first she hesitated. On her world, strangers were not trusted easily, but the thirst in her throat was unbearable, and his steady eyes told her he meant no harm. Slowly she took the cup and sipped. The cool taste helped her breathe easier. As she drank, Elias began to speak softly, knowing she couldn't understand. "You must have come a long way, huh? Don't worry, I'll help you. You're safe here." She tilted her head slightly, not understanding the words, but recognizing his gentle tone. He pointed to himself and said, "Elias." Then he placed a hand over his chest, repeating it, "Elias." After a pause, Lyria did the same. She placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "Lyria." Elias nodded with a small smile. "Lyria, that's your name." Even though she didn't catch the sentence, his expression told her he was pleased. For the first time since her ship had crashed, she felt something close to comfort. Days passed as Elias cared for her. He used the ship's translator to record her voice, trying to decode her language. It was complex, filled with tones and echoes that didn't match any known database. Still, he worked patiently, speaking to her every day. Sometimes he would point to things in ship, food, sky, and she would respond with her own words. Slowly, a few basic meanings began to form between them. At first, Lyria spoke little. She would sit near the viewing window staring at the stars. Her eyes often filled with quiet sadness. Elias noticed, but he didn't press her. He had lost people too. Friends on distant missions, family long gone. He understood the silence of grief. One evening, while they shared a meal, the ship suddenly shook. Warning lights flashed red across the control panels. Elias jumped up and checked the scanners. A pirate vessel had locked onto their trail. "Of course," he muttered, his hands flying over the controls. He turned to Lyria. "Hold on." Though she didn't understand, she felt his urgency and grabbed the chair's sides tightly. The ship spun sharply as Elias guided it through an asteroid belt. The pirate ship fired plasma bolts, sending flashes of light through the window. Elias pushed the engines to their limit, weaving between rocks and debris. The pirates followed, their weapons cutting across the darkness. Then one blast struck the hull, throwing both of them forward. Sparks filled the air. Lyria screamed softly, clutching the pendant around her neck. Elias turned, eyes sharp. "Stay down," he shouted. Ignoring the pain in his shoulder, he steered hard and released a flare bomb. The pirates swerved, blinded by the sudden light. Using the moment, Elias dived behind a large asteroid and shut down all power. Silence filled the cabin. Only their heavy breathing remained. Minutes passed before the scanners showed the pirate ship moving away, tricked by the false trail. Elias let out a breath of relief. He turned to Lyria, who was shaking slightly but unharmed. "It's all right now," he said softly. "We're safe." She didn't understand, but his calm voice soothed her. Carefully, she reached out and touched his hand. Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude. For the first time since they met, she smiled faintly. From that moment, something changed. Lyria began to trust him. She helped him repair panels, watched how he worked, and even tried to repeat his words. The translator slowly improved, catching fragments of her speech. She told him in broken phrases that she had been traveling from her home world when something attacked her ship. She remembered fire, pain, and darkness, then waking on the red sands. Elias listened quietly. He couldn't imagine what it was like to be lost so far from home. But one thing was clear, she wasn't just any traveler. Her clothes, her pendant, her manner, they all carried a quiet dignity. Whoever she was, she came from somewhere important. At night, as she slept, Elias sat by the control board, recording notes in his log. "She's learning fast," he said quietly to himself. She's strong, stronger than she knows. Lyria, though half asleep, could hear his soft voice. Even without knowing every word, she felt the meaning. This human, this strange being from a distant world, cared for her as no one else had since she was lost. And for the first time in many nights, she dreamed not of fire or fear, but of safety, of a light that guided her through the darkness. Far away, in her mother's palace, Queen Seraphis still searched the skies. She did not yet know that hope had already been found, in the heart of a human who refused to give up on a stranger. Across the great void of stars, the Volari fleet continued its desperate search. Their queen Seraphis had not rested in many moons. Her daughter's disappearance had shaken the empire, and whispers of doubt began to spread among the royal court. Many believed the princess was gone forever, but the queen's heart refused to accept it. Every day she stood before the star map, eyes tracing the same routes, hoping for a miracle. Her advisors begged her to stop, but a mother's love could not be silenced. Meanwhile, far away aboard the Sol Runner, Elias and Lyria had begun to understand each other a little more. Through patient effort and countless gestures, their translator slowly built meaning. Lyria learned simple words in the human language: food, water, safe, friend. She used them shyly, smiling each time Elias nodded in approval. In return, she taught him a few Volari words, showing him the right tones with careful patience. Their days passed quietly among the stars. When Elias worked on repairs, Lyria often helped by passing tools or reading data screens. She was quick to learn, graceful in her movements and curious about everything. She would ask questions with her eyes pointing to stars outside the window, then back to him, as if asking, "Is that your home?" Elias would smile and point to one small blue dot on the screen. "Earth," he'd say softly. "My home," Lyria repeated the word carefully. "Earth." It sounded strange on her tongue, but she liked how it felt, simple and warm, like him. One night, while Elias checked navigation logs, he noticed something unusual. A message signal flashed faintly on the radar, a Volari beacon. Its code was old, but still active. He looked at Lyria, wondering if it belonged to her people. When he showed it to her, her eyes widened in shock. The symbol on the screen matched the emblem on her pendant, the spiral sun of Valeria. She stood quickly, hands trembling. "Home," she whispered. "Valaria." Elias understood the meaning. His heart lifted. Finally, there was hope of bringing her back. But before he could plot a course, the ship's alarm rang out. A new signal appeared, not friendly this time. Pirates again. They must have tracked the old distress beacon. "Not now," Elias muttered, racing to the controls. He started the engines, but their fuel was low from the last chase. The pirates' larger ships began closing in, lights flashing like hungry eyes. Lyria gripped her seat, fear returning to her face. She turned to him, voice trembling. "They bad?" "Yes," Elias said quickly. "Very bad. But I won't let them take you." He sent a false trail, dropping decoy drones into space. The pirates fired, chasing the false signals. Elias took the chance to dive into a nearby nebula. Clouds of glowing gas surrounded them, hiding the ship. The air shimmered blue and purple like a sea of light. Inside the nebula, sensors were useless. For hours they drifted silently, engines off, hoping not to be found. Lyria sat beside Elias, clutching her pendant. The faint hum of the ship echoed in the quiet. Elias spoke softly, more to himself than to her. "You know, I've seen many things out here. Storms, war, empty planets. But I've never met anyone like you." Lyria turned her head slightly. "Human. Kind," she said slowly, trying to form the words she had heard from him before. Elias smiled faintly. "I try." For a long time they sat together in silence. Outside, the nebula swirled in endless color. It was dangerous but beautiful. Then the translator beeped softly. It had finished analyzing more of her language. A phrase appeared on the screen, one Lyria had said before when she touched her pendant: "Guardian of Light." Elias looked at the words, puzzled. "Guardian of Light?" He pointed to himself questioningly. Lyria hesitated, then nodded shyly. "You guardian." He didn't know what to say. No one had ever called him that. But when he looked at her, this lost being from a world of stars, he realized she meant it. To her, he was more than a rescuer. He was safety. Far across space, the Queen of Valeria received the first trace of her daughter's signal through the beacon network. Her heart nearly stopped. It was faint, distant, but real. The data showed an unknown ship near a human trade zone. "Prepare the royal fleet," she commanded, her voice shaking. "Find this signal. And if a human has my daughter, bring them both back alive." Her generals hesitated. Humans were considered primitive, unworthy of royal contact, but the Queen's gaze silenced them. "If a human saved my child," she said, "then perhaps our pride is misplaced." Back inside the nebula, Elias finally powered the engines again. The ship drifted out into open space, unaware that powerful eyes now watched the same signal. Lyria sat beside him, her eyes filled with quiet trust. She no longer looked lost. She looked hopeful. For Elias, the stars suddenly felt smaller, as if fate itself had chosen this meeting. He didn't yet know the truth, that the girl beside him was the heir of an empire, and that their journey together would soon change the destiny of two worlds. The hum of the Sol Runner was steady, as it moved through the quiet darkness of space. Lyria had begun to speak more, practicing the few human words she had learned. She pointed at the stars and said, "Home," repeating it softly, as if testing whether it was real that she might see her world again. Elias watched her carefully. He could see the longing in her eyes, the weight of months lost and fear survived. He had been through many dangerous missions, but none had felt as personal as this. Protecting her was no longer just a duty. It was a responsibility that filled him with both pride and fear. Every time he looked at her, he worried about what could happen if the pirates returned, or worse, if her people misunderstood him. Yet he knew he could not abandon her, no matter the risk. As they approached the outer rim of the human trade sector, the ship's sensors picked up another signal. This one was unfamiliar. It did not match any known pirate ships nor any human vessel. Lyria leaned over his shoulder, eyes wide as the screen lit up with strange symbols. Elias studied them carefully. "I think that's Valari," he said quietly. Lyria gasped softly. Her hand went to her pendant, clutching it tightly. "Mother," she whispered. The word came hesitantly, as though testing if it could be spoken aloud safely. Her eyes searched the stars beyond the window, hoping to see the familiar glow of her home. Elias put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to get you home," he said firmly. "I promise. No one is going to hurt you." Even as they spoke, the mysterious signal grew stronger. Suddenly, the ship's AI warned of approaching vessels. Lights flashed red across the control panels. Large Valari ships emerged from the darkness, elegant and imposing. Their hulls shimmered like molten silver, reflecting distant starlight. Lyria's heart raced. She had never seen her people in such numbers outside her home world. The main Valari ship sent a transmission. The words were in their language, rapid and commanding. Lyria translated the meaning slowly, her voice trembling. "Princess. Found human. Guardian, bring back safely." Elias nodded, understanding immediately. These were not hostile forces. They were the royal fleet, sent to recover Lyria. Relief washed over him, but so did caution. "We need to show them you're safe. They'll listen if we're calm." He guided the Sol Runner slowly toward the largest ship. Guards approached in small craft, scanning for threats. Elias held the controls steady, keeping the engines running just enough to maintain their position. Lyria stood beside him, trembling, her hands clutching the pendant. When the boarding team arrived, Elias stayed beside the controls. One Valari commander, tall and elegant, entered the cabin. He looked at Lyria with both respect and curiosity, then turned to Elias. "You are the human who protected her?" he asked in perfect common, the universal trade language. Elias nodded. "I didn't know who she was at first. I just knew she needed help." The commander's eyes softened. "By royal decree, you are not to be harmed. The Queen wishes to meet you." Lyria's eyes filled with tears. She had feared this moment, that her people would punish him, that she would have to leave the one who saved her. But relief shone brightly as she realized the truth. The human who had kept her alive was respected by her people. Elias helped her down from the ship's small cabin. Together, they walked toward the waiting transport that would take her back to Valeria Prime. Guards flanked them, but none made a move to stop him. Lyria glanced back at him, whispering a word he had begun to understand. "Guardian." The human nodded slightly, his heart heavy yet proud. He had come to care for this girl deeply, and now he would have to let her go, yet seeing her safe and honored gave him a strange peace. The Valari ships moved through the stars with quiet precision faster than anything Elias had ever seen. Inside the largest vessel, Lyria was finally able to breathe more freely. She sat beside a small viewing window and looked at the universe stretching before her. She knew her home was close. She knew her mother waited. Elias remained behind as the transport ship detached. Lyria leaned forward slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything." He gave a small smile, nodding. "Take care of her," he said softly to the commander. "She's important." The Valari commander inclined his head. "She is the princess, and you have given her life. That is a gift no one can repay." As the transport ship moved ahead, Elias watched it disappear into the stars. The universe felt quieter now, yet fuller. He had discovered something rare, the impact one life could have on another, across worlds, across species. Far away, Queen Seraphis waited in her palace. The signal had reached her, and her heart leapt as the images came through. Her daughter was alive, safe, in the care of a human no less. The queen wept openly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Courtiers whispered, unsure whether to step forward. But the queen did not care. Her daughter was alive. That was all that mattered, and across the vast galaxies, a story was beginning to take shape, a tale of bravery, trust, and the unusual bond between a human and a princess who had lost her way. The journey back to Valeria Prime was quiet, yet tense. Lyria sat beside the observation window of the transport vessel, her silver eyes fixed on the stars. She had been silent for most of the trip, still processing the reality that she would soon be home. The presence of Elias lingered in her mind. He had saved her, cared for her, and shown a kindness she had never known among her own people. She could not forget him, even though she would soon be back in the arms of her mother and surrounded by the grandeur of her empire. Elias, meanwhile, stayed aboard the Sol Runner, coordinating with the Valari fleet through the comm system. Though he was far from the princess now, he remained attentive, ensuring the transport stayed on course and free from danger. Pirates and rogue traders roamed the edges of space, and he knew that anyone traveling alone in such regions could be vulnerable. He was determined that nothing would harm her, not even at this distance. Inside the grand halls of the Valari flagship, Lyria's mind was full of memories, flashes of home, of the palace gardens, of her mother's laughter, and of the lessons she had once taken for granted. She felt a flutter of nervous excitement mixed with fear. How would her mother react to the human who had saved her? Would the court accept him? She pressed the spiral sun pendant closer to her heart, drawing strength from the symbol of her family. The fleet approached the royal planet. Valeria Prime stretched beneath them, a world of towering crystal spires, shimmering rivers, and vast gardens that reflected the stars. The sight of her home made Lyria's heart race with emotion. She had imagined it countless times, yet seeing it from above was a feeling unlike anything she had ever known. As the transport docked within the palace's grand spaceport, the crew prepared for the final descent. Lyria's pulse quickened. The doors opened, revealing the grand courtyard of her mother's palace. The Valari guards formed lines on either side, their polished armor gleaming. And there at the center stood Queen Seraphis herself. She had not left her throne for many cycles, yet the moment she saw her daughter, she moved forward with swift, graceful steps, tears glistening in her eyes. "Lyria," the queen cried, her voice echoing across the courtyard. She swept her arms around her daughter in a fierce embrace. Lyria felt a warmth she had longed for, the sense of safety she had not realized she missed so deeply. The two held each other, the queen's tears dampening her daughter's hair. Elias watched from the ship's observation deck, unseen by most. He felt a mix of pride and melancholy. He had returned her safely, but he knew this was the moment he would leave her side. Yet he also felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that his actions had mattered, that compassion could bridge worlds and species. The queen finally pulled back slightly, lifting her daughter's face to look at her. "You are alive," she whispered, "and it is because of him." She gestured toward Elias, who had just entered the courtyard with cautious steps, escorted by Valari guards. The human stood straight, though his hands were slightly raised in respect, unsure of how to act in the presence of royalty. The queen studied him carefully, Her eyes, sharp and discerning, examined his every gesture. Yet there was no fear, no hostility, and only gratitude. "You saved my daughter," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "For that you have my thanks and the honor of Valeria." Elias bowed, keeping his eyes low. "I did what anyone would have done," he said humbly. "I only wanted her to be safe." The queen shook her head, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Humans often underestimate themselves," she said softly. "But your courage and your heart have proven otherwise. You have shown what we sometimes forget, that strength is not only in power but in care and courage." Lyria stepped forward, taking his hand in hers. She did not speak. Words could not fully express what she felt. Instead, she gave him a look that carried gratitude, respect, and an unspoken bond that would last across the stars. The courtiers watched silently, unsure how to respond. Some had expected a reprimand for letting a human touch the princess, while others wondered if the queen's display of emotion was a sign of weakness. But the queen ignored them all. Her focus was clear. Her daughter was safe, and this human had made that possible. After a moment, the queen spoke again. "You will be welcome in Valeria. Your deeds shall not be forgotten." She paused, her gaze meeting Elias's. "More than that, you have reminded us all of the value of kindness, courage, and the willingness to protect life beyond our own." For the first time in many months, Lyria smiled fully, the tension of her journey finally lifting. She felt hope, for herself, for her mother, and for the human who had become her guardian. The bond they had forged would not be forgotten, and though their worlds were far apart, it would remain a story of courage, trust, and the enduring power of the heart. Elias stepped back, allowing the princess and her mother to walk ahead. The courtyard seemed to shine brighter that day, the crystal spires reflecting the warmth of reunion. He knew his part in this story was done, yet the experience had changed him. Across the vast universe, he had learned that compassion could bridge the greatest distances, and that even the smallest act of courage could alter destiny. And as the doors of the palace closed behind him, Elias looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, a princess would remember a human who believed in her life, her safety, and the value of hope. The palace of Valeria was filled with a quiet energy that day, a mixture of relief, curiosity, and awe. The courtiers whispered among themselves as Queen Seraphis led Lyria through the halls. Her daughter walked carefully, still weak from the long journey and months of uncertainty, yet her silver eyes shone with the light that had been absent for far too long. The palace, usually imposing and formal, seemed softer somehow, touched by the emotion that radiated from the queen and her daughter. Elias followed, escorted by Valari guards, unsure of his place among royalty. He had spent his life in the stars, navigating dangerous paths and unknown territories, yet never had he felt quite as nervous. Every eye in the hall seemed to study him, questioning his presence, judging his worth. But he held his head high, remembering that he had done only what any compassionate being would do. He had saved a life, and that was more than enough. Queen Seraphis finally stopped before a vast chamber, walls of crystal reflecting light in soft rainbows. She turned to Lyria, who had paused at the threshold. "This is your sanctuary," the queen said. "Here you will recover fully, surrounded by those who love you." Lyria stepped forward, clutching her pendant. She looked at Elias and then back at her mother. A small, uncertain smile crossed her face. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. Instead, she simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and love. The queen's eyes then shifted to Elias. "You have risked much for my daughter. That courage and care cannot go unrecognized." She gestured toward him. "Step forward." Elias hesitated, unsure what form of recognition was customary for Valeria. The queen's gaze, however, left no room for refusal. He stepped forward slowly. "You have shown humanity in its purest form," the queen said, her voice steady and clear. "You have proven that strength is not measured only in power, but in the will to protect those who cannot protect themselves. For this you are honored among my people." The words stunned Elias. He had never imagined being praised in this way, especially not by royalty from another world. He bowed respectfully, humbled by the acknowledgement. "I only did what I thought was right," he said quietly. The queen smiled softly, a mixture of pride and relief shining in her eyes. "And that is what matters most." She turned to Lyria, who had moved closer to Elias, her small hand brushing his arm. Your bond is remarkable. Never forget it, for it is a reminder that even across worlds, kindness and courage can create connections stronger than fear or distance. Lyria looked up at her mother, then back at Elias. She nodded as if sealing the promise of their friendship, their trust, and their shared journey. The courtiers, who had been skeptical of humans, watched quietly. Many whispered that perhaps the queen had been too emotional, too forgiving. Yet others felt a stirring of admiration. If a human could display such bravery and compassion, what might it mean for the future of Valeria's relations with other worlds? Could the prejudices that had long divided species begin to fade? Elias, sensing the thoughts around him, remained humble. He did not seek recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from knowing Lyria was safe, and that the queen herself had seen the truth, that even beings from a distant, primitive world could carry honor, courage, and compassion equal to any royal warrior. After a moment, the queen spoke again, her voice carrying softly but clearly across the chamber. Lyria, you have returned to us, and Elias, you have returned her safely. The galaxy will remember this day, not for battles won, but for the mercy, courage, and loyalty displayed. Let this be a lesson. Even in a universe full of power and pride, it is the heart that defines greatness. Lyria, now standing taller, reached out and touched Elias's hand. No words were spoken, yet the gesture spoke volumes. He had been her protector, her guide, and her friend when she had needed it most. That connection would endure, regardless of the distance between their worlds. Later, as the hall emptied, the queen pulled Lyria aside. She held her daughter close and whispered words full of love and pride. Lyria rested her head against her mother's shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in months. Elias, meanwhile, returned to the observation balcony of the palace. From there he could see the sprawling beauty of Valeria Prime, its crystal towers, shimmering gardens, and rivers reflecting the light of distant suns. He thought of the journey they had shared, of the dangers they had faced, and of the trust that had grown between a human and a princess. He realized that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could leave the greatest impact, crossing species, empires, and galaxies. As the stars shone above Valeria Prime, Lyria and her mother walked hand in hand back to the sanctuary. Elias watched them go, a quiet sense of fulfillment in his heart. Though he would return to his own world soon, the memory of this day, of the trust and bond they had forged, would remain with him forever. And somewhere deep within the queen's heart, a new understanding began to grow that compassion, courage, and honor could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the heart of a human who had crossed the stars to save her daughter. The days that followed Lyria's return were filled with quiet joy and careful adjustments. She spent time with her mother, walking through the palace gardens and exploring halls she had not seen in months. The flowers seemed brighter, the air sweeter, and every corner of the palace carried a sense of welcome that had been absent for too long. Yet even in the midst of this comfort, her thoughts often drifted to Elias. She remembered the nights aboard the Sol Runner, drifting through stars and nebulae, sharing moments of fear, hope, and understanding. He had protected her when she was vulnerable, guided her when she was lost, and taught her to trust again. Though they came from different worlds, a bond had formed between them that no distance could erase. She clutched the spiral sun pendant, feeling the memory of his presence like a warm light against her chest. Queen Seraphis noticed the way Lyria's gaze lingered on the stars at night. One evening she approached her daughter in the palace observatory, the vast expanse of the galaxy reflected in her eyes. "You think of him often," the queen said softly. Lyria nodded, unsure of how to express the depth of her gratitude and affection. "He saved me," she whispered. "He carried me when I could not move, guided me when I could not see. Without him, I might not have returned." The queen's eyes softened. "Then it is right that you remember him," she said. "He has proven that courage and kindness are not bound by species or empire. He has shown us all a lesson, one that even a queen must learn anew, to value the heart above all else." Meanwhile, Elias prepared for his return to Earth. The human who had once traveled alone through the stars now carried memories of a journey that would stay with him forever. His crew had grown quiet, sensing the gravity of what had been accomplished. Across light years, he had bridged a gap between civilizations, earned the trust of a princess, and even touched the heart of a queen. Few humans could claim such an honor. Before he left, the queen summoned him to the palace balcony. Valeria Prime stretched out beneath them, its crystal towers glittering like stars brought to the ground. The wind from the high terraces ruffled his hair as he looked at her. "You have returned my daughter to me," the queen said, her voice calm but powerful. "For that you have my eternal gratitude. Your courage has reminded us of the strength and compassion, and your honor has changed the way we view humanity." Elias bowed, unsure what more to say. "I only did what I thought was right," he said. The queen shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Then the right has spoken for itself. You will always be welcome in Valeria, human. You have our trust, our respect, and the knowledge that you have made a difference where it was needed most." Lyria stepped forward, her small hand finding his. She did not need words. Her touch said all that her voice could not. Elias looked down at her, feeling the depth of their connection. Though worlds separated them, the bond they had forged was unbreakable. The human stepped back reluctantly, knowing it was time to leave, yet unwilling to forget the lives he had touched. Lyria watched him go, tears glistening in her silver eyes. She whispered softly, "Guardian." Elias turned and gave a small, reassuring nod. "Always," he replied, though she could not hear him across the stars. As his ship departed Valeria Prime, he looked back one last time. The princess and the queen stood on the balcony, their figures small but radiant against the shining spires of the palace. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had played a part in restoring hope and protecting life, and in proving that humanity's courage could extend far beyond his own world. Back in the palace, Queen Seraphis and Princess Lyria stood together, watching the fading trail of the human ship. Lyria leaned against her mother's side, feeling safe, loved, and whole again. "He was more than a guardian," she said softly. "He was a reminder of what we sometimes forget, that courage and kindness can come from anywhere, even the most unexpected of places." The queen nodded, tears shining in her eyes once more. "And now you have both returned, stronger, wiser, and reminded that the heart is the truest measure of strength." Lyria looked up at the stars stretching across the sky. She thought of Elias, of the long journey through danger, the quiet moments of trust, and the bravery that had brought her home. She whispered a promise to herself, that she would never forget him, nor the lessons he had taught her. Across the galaxy, humans continued to live their ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary bond that had just been forged among the stars. But somewhere in the heart of one human, the memory of a princess and a queen, and the knowledge that he had made a difference, would shine forever. And on Valeria Prime, a queen wept not from sorrow but from relief and gratitude. Her daughter was home, safe and sound, and in the care of a human the impossible had become real. A story of courage, trust, and the enduring power of compassion would echo across the stars for generations, reminding all who heard it that even in a vast and sometimes cruel universe, kindness and bravery could change the course of destiny. The galaxy, it seemed, had witnessed a miracle. A human had saved a princess, a queen had wept with joy, and the bonds of hope and courage had stretched farther than anyone could have imagined. And that was a story worth remembering.